Right, welcome everybody to the meeting. We're very excited to have Ian Hodson at the meeting today to talk on the topic, now we've got a Labour government, what should the unions do? Which to me seems a very important question. Now, I know Ian doesn't really need any introduction, but I've mugged up, so you're going to get an introduction anyway. So he's been the national president of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union now for, well, since 2010. And he's just told me before that as a national officer and so on. So he's given 40 years service, actually, nearly at the moment. Well, when he retires, he'll have given 40 years service, which is amazing. So, but also the union itself is very interesting. It was first established in 1847. So it's had 175 years experience in representing employees in the food sector. And it was one of the unions that set up the Labour Party in 1902. So it was one of its strongest supporters because it helped set the Labour Party up. But in September 2021, it disaffiliated from the Labour Party. And the reasons given were that Starmer was concentrating on factional fighting within the party instead of fighting for working class or policies that would benefit the working class. And at the same time, Ian himself was expelled for the party through showing support for Labour against the witch hunt. So that's something that I'm quite familiar with myself. I was supporting LLA and I got expelled for the same reason. So definitely the reasons given were absolutely spot on, this factional nonsense in the party itself. Anyway, I shall say no more than to hand over to Ian to answer the question, now we've got a Labour government, what should the unions do?
Thank you, Carol, and thank you very much for the invitation to come along this reasonable time, really. I mean, normally they're late at night, but obviously 5:30. It's a great time to be here for me. But obviously the general election I think was really interesting. I think the turnout showed that there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm for a Labour government. I think that the fact that people weren't turning out in the way that you would expect. At the end of a really awful government, a government of total incompetence, who have been obviously feathering their own nests and making decisions in the interests of themselves and their friends. You would have expected, well, I feel you would have expected a real enthusiasm for people to go out and take part in that democratic process. I mean, I was also very concerned in the run-up to the election that there may be an issue with people feeling that they would opt out of voting altogether. So I was really pleased to see quite a number of independents standing. I thought that was quite important in this election to make sure people could take part in democracy. And of course, there was a number of people that have been elected as independents, and obviously it was good to see also, that people felt that the days of Labour and moving to an alternative party like the Green Party was something that they now feel is the right thing for them to do. And obviously, when you look at the outcome of the election and you see the positions of Greens and Independents, I mean, people like Liam Mohammed and Andrew Feinstein, you recognise that if this Labour government doesn't deliver, and for me, I see this Labour government as one that has a similar politics to the likes of Macron in France. I fear that, with reform and its positions too, I see the Conservative Party moving even further to the right, with a Braverman or a Badinach at its helm, and maybe even forming an alliance with reform. I fear that the rise of the far right in this country is a real threat to us here in this country, and that's why I do think it's important that we deal with the issues that are in front of us and not the ones that the bosses want to buy, or the corporations want to provide finances to politicians to support. I mean, I've just read today, that the reason why there's not going to be a Leveson 2, according to the likes of Lisa Nandy, is because part of the deal to get the Sun and the Murdoch media on side was to suggest that it wouldn't support Leveson 2, which I think is absolutely appalling, because we all saw, the need for improving our media in this country. And during the election, obviously, Starmer said very, very little. But the little he did say, did seem to centre around how he was bringing change. But you can't change anything unless you change the politics that's been imposed on us, and I believe hasn't really changed since 1979. I mean, I believe that from 1979 onwards, we've not had collective solutions to the problems that we face. I don't believe that the idea of collectivism any longer exists in the two mainstream parties. I don't think they understand that we need collective solutions rather than individual solutions. I think there's been too much emphasis in the world of employment that says that the priority is the shareholders, and obviously people should be working to maximise profit so shareholders can benefit. I think the issue for working people is that model has led to decades of low pay and a reliance on in-work benefits, where the benefit system should be used to support people who are unable to work, unemployed, or require support because of medical reasons, disabled benefits that were there and are there to support people, or should be available. But instead, as we've gone down this path of low pay and job insecurity, what we seem to have also seen is the demonization of those people that rely on benefits. And my only belief around that issue is that's done deliberately. So it makes people afraid to lose their job. It makes them fearful that they may require to go into the benefit system. And it also encourages this idea that somehow that people on benefits are lesser people, and you don't want to be part of that group. Where to me, the idea of the welfare state was to recognise at times in our lives find ourselves where we're unable to work. We find ourselves in need of support, and that's why we all made those contributions. And I honestly believe that we need to get back to that understanding that the only way people's health will improve, mental health in the workplace and all of that, is if we recognise that the solution is collective. It's the same with housing. We keep getting told that, obviously under the Tories, the whole thing was that there is no housing because, all these migrants have come over here and taken your homes, and, they're the reason why you can't. But it's not. The reason why there's no housing is because council housing stopped building. Councils were stopped from building them. We've moved into a society which believes that affordable homes is the way forward. And that would be fine if people were able to get a mortgage. But if you're on a 0 hours contract, you cannot get a mortgage. And if you're going into the rented sector and most of the properties are owned by people looking to maximize their profits, then finding a decent home is very expensive, and finding the quality of housing your low pay can buy normally means living in an accommodation which is not to a standard which I believe that we all deserve as working class people in working class communities. And obviously the right has made great play on that because they understand. And so what they do is they marginalise groups, they marginalise communities, and they create this belief that actually the reason why you've not got the ability to live somewhere decent is because of all these people coming in. I mean, sometimes I have a conversation with people and I point out to them, well, these small boat people coming over in the small, they're not here yet. They're still over in France. but yet you're still struggling. You know, you've got hardship in your life. And it's not because these people have come over, because they've not been responsible. They've not been responsible for making the decisions, whether it's to stop council house building, to rule over the fact that we've had an explosion in food banks because people's wages are too low, and that 0 hours contracts have just gone mad right across the economy because they can. Those were decisions taken by politicians. And that's why it is important, you know, like I said at the beginning of this, to keep people involved in democracy and give people an option. And now we've got a situation where we've seen in France, we've seen in the understanding that that threat was very real from the far right, and the left finally united and came together to be able to defeat what would have been absolutely shocking. But right across Europe, we can see the rise of the far right. And most of that is directly as a consequence of centrism, of centrist politics, politics that continues basically to protect capitalism and undermine the opportunities for people to be able to live a decent life, you know, to maintain this idea that profit will change our lives. Profit hasn't changed our lives since 1979. The only things that change our lives are rights. It's the rights that we have. That's what gives us an opportunity to be able to improve it. The right to a contract of employment, the right to a pension, the right to financial support when I find myself in hardship, the right to be able to work without risk of being told that I'm not getting any hours. Those are rights that we should all be entitled to. And that's why I think it's really, really important, because a lot of people didn't really hear the Labour Party commit to a lot of stuff, but they voted believing the message that they were getting was there will be change to their lives. And that means real political change. And there has to be real policies delivered by this Labour government. I was on the TUCG call today and with a lot of other unions, non-affiliated unions, and we were talking about what we need to do. And what we believe we need to do is, you know, in 2021, when we disaffiliated, before we disaffiliated, Andy McDonald put on the floor of the Labour Party conference what was called the New Deal for Workers. It was a fantastic document. I mean, it included, you know, all the trade union contribution, and it recognised all of the key issues that we face as workers. It recognised that job insecurity did not build long-term stability. It recognised that pay was too low. It recognised that benefits being used to subsidise, you know, gross held products, you know, is not the right way to use the resources that we have. You know, it recognised that we needed to go back to collective solutions. It recognised that trade unions change workplaces and change lives. It recognised the need to be able to stop employers from you know, being able to restrict workers from understanding the power that they have when they organise into a trade union, by putting in place the right of a trade union to get access to those workers without being, you know, barred from a workplace, the right to be able to talk to those workers, to explain how their lives can be different if they organise, to improve, you know, pay, to recognise. I mean, in 2019, Keir Starmer was supporting £15 an hour. In 2024, he's talking about £12 something, but just for care workers. I mean, £12 something for care workers. You know, they absolutely should be on at least £15 an hour. You know, they absolutely should be on more than that. They look after some of the most vulnerable people in our society, and many of them are our parents, you know, or our grandparents, you know. I mean, so it's really, really important, you know, that those people, when they get to that age, are looked after, and we should invest in them. And that means making sure that they don't have to worry about their lives because they can't afford to live, because they've got such an important role to look after our loved ones. It's really, really, to me, it's really, really critical, because if you want productive workers, they need to know that their parent or grandparent is being looked after in that home. And the best way to be able to do that is to make sure that we're paying wages that enable them to live that decent life, and they're not having to worry and maybe, because of debt, fall into this idea that there is no opportunities, and end up with mental health problems and then need that care themselves. So I think, I obviously, do not expect this Labour Party to honour the commitment that it made in 2021. I mean, and it's said on several occasions, from our perspective as a trade union, we intend, and we've actually advised the Labour Party of this, we intend to launch campaigns against the Labour Party. So we're working with some campaigning organisations around the issue of 0 hours contracts. I mean, they're on about banning exploitative 0 hours contracts. Well, all 0 hours contracts are exploitative. You've got no rights. I mean, we were dealing with workers who, in some cases, have been working for up to 20 years for Railtrack. And when the company went bust, after 20 years, on average working 47 hours a week for 20 years, they found they were entitled to not a single penny of redundancy because they weren't an employee. They found, because they were a 0 hours contract worker, so as far as the state is concerned, not the responsibility of state, they couldn't even go into the state system to get any state redundancy either. These workers have been excluded, and we also found that when people have been on 0 hours contracts throughout their working life, because they normally are below the minimum earnings threshold, that when they retire, that poverty and that exploitation actually gets taken into retirement. Because unless they're cash rich and can afford to pay those contributions, then they won't even be entitled to their full retirement pension. So again, from being exploited in the workplace to being in retirement, or to being a loyal worker and finding you're not compensated, for all of your years of service when a company goes bust. And when these companies go bust, they're not, the people who run these companies aren't normally at risk of financial hardship. They're normally very well protected and well financed. So I mean, those are really, really critical reasons why, the idea that every person who goes into a workplace has a contract of employment from day one is critical. Not for some, but for all. And this idea that as a worker, you can go and negotiate and decide what's best for you in a work world where there's total imbalance is just ridiculous. It's not going to happen. You cannot, go to a potential new employer and say, I want a contract of employment, because if they don't want to offer you one, you ain't going to get one. And the likelihood is you ain't even going to be offered the 0 hours contract either. And people don't go to work on a 0 hours contracts because they believe that's where they want to be. They go because they know they need to try and get the money to get by. And that's why it's so important. And that's why, as a union, we will continue that fight. And obviously, we were already talking about that. We will target the Labour government. We will call them Labour's exploitative contracts. And really campaign heavily on that. In the same way, that we're going to campaign for, a minimum wage of 15 quid an hour. I mean, it's ridiculous that it's still 15 quid. I mean, we started that campaign in 2019, which was 5 years ago. And yet working people in this country are still struggling. We're still paying an awful amount of money to global corporations like McDonald's. Then they pay in tax to their workers because their pay is so low, they can't live without that income support. So again, if we want to tackle the issues that we face in society. The only way we're going to do that is by making work really pay, by having a pay limit that actually reflects the ability to have a decent lifestyle. And that means setting it at a level which enables people to live without the need for benefits. I think the idea that this Labour Party, with its massive majority, doesn't see that as the priority and has chosen instead to invest in more weapons, to put the support of the war in Ukraine. I mean, whichever side you're on, you know, whether you believe that the Russians are right or the Ukrainians are right, whichever side you're on, the fact of the matter is, in this country, we have children starving. We have people using food pantries and food banks. But our first aim is not to support the people in the UK, but to fund more weapons, to put more weapons into an area that's already overrun, you know, with death and destruction. I mean, to me, I think the priority is to sit down with the parties and look at how we achieve peace. And I don't understand why having war should take that priority. I don't understand the way that we're still producing arms to send to Israel is still a priority for a government that says it wants to recognize the Palestine state, but doesn't see the Palestinians live in a country which is separate from Israel to be able to carry out those atrocities of which it's doing. For me, we need real change in politics. For me, we need a new deal for workers, but we need a new deal for all of the people in the United Kingdom. I'm quite happy to take questions, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. I just agree totally. I just agree totally with everything you've said. We need a new politics. We actually need a new constitution, don't we? We need a constitution where all those rights are enshrined and they can't be taken away. We need to change the whole story altogether. Absolutely agree with you. Can I please, if anyone would like to ask questions or contribute, if you could just raise your electronic hand so I can see it. And then I will bring you in to ask Ian questions. If I can just ask a question for myself, I know I'm abusing the position of chair here, but can I ask a question? So do you think that, you know, your union is disaffiliated from the Labour Party? Do you think other unions should do that? And maybe back, I don't know, back an organisation, a new party perhaps, outside of this Labour Party? What's your thoughts on that?
This is going to sound a cop out. I always believe it's not my role to interfere in the way that other unions conduct themselves. I think it's the right of the union and its members to make those decisions. What I would say is that we took a decision based on whether or not the Labour Party represented the interests of our members. We could have made a decision as an executive to say, oh yeah, we get some freebies, we get this, we get that, we get to sit around the table, we could get to Downing Street when there's an election called, and that'll really benefit us and give us a higher profile. But that's not, in my opinion, what we're in this for. I believe we're in it because we want to improve the rights of the people we represent. We conducted a survey to engage our members' opinions. I don't know what those other trade unions do and how they communicate and find out whether their members are happy. But for me, I certainly don't see any future in its current direction of travel that would make me want to go back. And we just had a reaffiliation motion at our last conference, and I'm pleased to say it was unanimously. Even the mover of the motion didn't vote for their own motion. So I mean, it was unanimously agreed that we continue to disaffiliate. So I mean, you know, I'm quite pleased with that.
but it was a democratic decision of the youth,
Democratic
which is
decision.
brilliant.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
I mean, and that's how it should be, you know, that,
absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely. Right, I've got Steve Freeman has his hand. I'm going to bring Steve in now.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. I'll mute myself. Hi, Ian. Thank you very much for coming and explaining your situation and how you think about it. And I have a lot of what you said. I agree with a lot of it. I mean, even the bits I don't agree with. I'd just like to go, I think, a little bit further. I agree with you that there are probably three. I mean, you could start in 1945, then go 19, because in a way, 1979, which you began, was really the destruction of what was the welfare state of 1945, and that destruction carried on right the way through both Thatcher and through the Blair governments until, and I think there's another level to be added onto this story, which is the financial crisis of 2007, because I think that flipped us in from one of really destroying the welfare state to an absolute almost collapse. We've been living through, under austerity, literally a collapse of our whole political and social system, our constitution, our system of government, our every water, electric, everything you want to. Is there anything that's not completely broken? Our universities, our prisons, our water system, everything has gone completely busted. And in a way, it's taken that previous thing, its previous starting point down to another level. And it's not clear to me that we can just kind of go backwards almost to that point. We can't restore, I don't think, what's been lost in terms of the welfare state and all those other things now, because it is deeply, deeply broken. Now, I'm not saying you disagree with any of that, but what I doing some work with the Republican Labour Education Forum, and what we're arguing is that we need a new constitution. We actually need to have a republic. And Tony Benn back in 1993 came up with this idea that we needed a new constitution, a republican constitution. In other words, you need to reset the democracy, because otherwise we are going towards fascism, as you say. We've seen reform now, as well as the left. The two-party system almost broke at the last election, I think. So we've got like almost something outside the norm for us. So this is a sign of the totally broken nature of our political system. And the left doesn't really do republican democracy. I mean, I think you do in a way, because because it's about republicanism, not about the king so much as having grassroots organization, having community organization, having a commonwealth, as a term we use for that. A state that is there for the benefit of the people. That's what we need, and that's therefore not. We've got to go deeper than simply imagining that we could call for the taxing of the rich and the nationalisation of this and that industry, and somehow that's going to work in this new situation. So I won't end there because it's a contribution, but I think the New Deal. I think the New Deal has to have a political side to it, a democratic side to it, much deeper than anything we on the left have been doing. Because the thing about Tony Benn's ideas back in nobody took them up. Nobody took them seriously. They've never been taken up. And even Jeremy Corbyn, for all his radicalism, never really argued we need a new political system, including in a constitution, workers' rights. Because in this group, we talked about a constitution with social rights written in there, the basic law we need. And then we can do the trade union bargaining with a different framework. When we shifted the power balance within the political system, trade unions are in a different position because everything is stacked against trade unions completely in law as well as in trade unions. So I'd like to maybe send you the manifesto, Ian, after this thing that we did for the and I'd love your comments if we could, the manifesto that we did during the election that's taken up some of these questions.
Happy for that one.
Thanks very much, Steve. I've got Mike has got his hand up. So Mike, I'm going to bring you in now.
Hi, thanks, Ian. I agree with Steve insofar as we have to go forward, not backwards, looking behind us with rosy tinted spectacles to the idyll such as it was of the high period of the welfare state. There were limitations. There were extreme limitations. It always discriminated. Racism was built in, and it was top down. It was a directed state. And what we're looking for now, and this again is another strand of the republicanism, is that what we build now has to be involve direct democracy, has to involve people's assemblies, citizens' assemblies, groups of workers, workplace assemblies, if you will, in a way that really has never happened. And so when we look to nationalisation and renationalisation, we're not looking to reconstitute the same old. I mean, there were two meetings this evening, online meetings, both to do with trade unions. I chose you, Ian. The other one was End Social Care Disgrace, which is a campaign I've been involved in, which is about reconstituting social care in terms of it being free at the point of use, like the NHS, and empowering service users as well as workers, and having a decent pay structure for workers and a career structure, all the things that, carers are presently considered to be unskilled and paid less than shelf stackers. But anyway, I mean, I will go back to that campaign, but I chose this. And you asked also, what do people in other unions feel vis-a-vis Labour Party and vis-a-vis, being the tail to the dog, the rather mangy dog. I'm in Unite. I'm a member of Unite Community, which comprises people who either aren't working but are not retired members, or people who are in jobs that aren't unionizable as such. There aren't workplace branches. And we are massively, many of us voted for Sharon Graham, the apparent wild card, sort of organizer, seemed very grassrootsy. There was that thing about not being very, not caring too much about politics. But we thought, of course, she meant the old politics. Actually, she has adhered to the old politics. And how it is coming out is in the question of Gaza, where she has been conspicuous, not only by her silence, but by her attempts to shut up union activists and to discipline them for trying to speak out. I mean, one of her famous quotes is, "We have no members in Gaza." Well, tell that to Jack Jones before he went off to fight in the Spanish Civil War, or indeed to the Lancashire mill workers, when the cotton workers rather, when they struck during the American Civil War, against their own direct interests, because they believed in the need to get rid of slavery. We always have an internationalist approach. And the very last thing I want to say, you raised the question of the arms trade, which is obviously true, and it's gross and doing extremely well in the present environment. However, I think just to talk peace, I mean, Putin is a monster. He is a right-wing monster to whom other right-wing monsters look up. So I don't think it's possible to sit down and talk to Mr. Putin. However, and I'm not a pacifist. I am in favor of people who are invaded fighting for their rights not to be invaded, and for their self-determination, as I defend Palestinians defending themselves physically if necessary. So I do also in relation to people in Ukraine. That does not mean that we go down the road of supporting NATO. Again, we need to look at independent action by workers. I'll leave it there, but I hope it's not as simple as, we're either peaceniks
Yeah,
or we go along with NATO. There are many, even in this group, who believe that. It's an unresolved discussion, and huge numbers of people on the left, want to really go very soft on Putin, even on Trump. I'm truly shocked.
just to answer that question, I mean, obviously, I took part in an international conference over in France. It was attended by people from Ukraine, from Russia, and from Belarus. I mean, my position on the Ukraine war is this: I think the Russians should be out, and obviously the Ukrainians, should be running their own country. I don't think the Russians should be in there at all. But I also don't believe the expansion of NATO should be happening. I mean, so that is my position in relation to the Ukraine war. I mean, and I hear comments about, you can't talk to Putin, but the only way wars ever get settled is through negotiations with the aggressor, the oppressor. That somebody has to talk to them. And what we haven't got here is anybody willing to talk. There seems to be this idea, certainly from the States, who probably could influence bringing that to an end of what's between Russia and Ukraine, but have chosen not to, in my opinion. And part of the reason why I believe they've done that is because what they think is that they can have a weakened Russia, and this might sound like, a ridiculous comment, but my belief is they want to, have a weakened Russia so they can really have a war with China, because that's who the Americans really want, because the Chinese and its financial power now, and its aim to replace the petrodollar is a real threat and undermining of potential capitalism. And I think they see them, and they think that this Russian-Ukraine war will weaken Russia and stop that access between Russia and China, and they will just be able to use all of their power and influence over those countries that form NATO, and obviously, other areas around the world, which the Americans seem to think that they have the most influence on. So that's how I view that conflict, and that's why, that's why I also was very careful in saying, whichever side you take, whether it's on the side of the Ukrainians or whether it's on the side of whichever side it is, for me, actually, wars get settled by negotiations. It needs parties to want to do it, and we don't currently have a situation where any party wants to do it, and that's a problem. That's what I was trying to say, but obviously I only had a short time, otherwise you'd been here all night.
Thanks very much, Ian and Mike. I've got Jennifer Devlin. I'm going to bring Jennifer in now.
Thank you very much, Ian. Great speech.
Thank you.
Thoroughly agree with you. So I'm in a constituency which has just elected an independent,
Right.
in Dewsbury and Batley, or Batley and Dewsbury, as I should say. And he got a 7,000 majority, so a healthy majority, and he's local, and we appreciate that. And there was local participation in his selection. And then, of course, Labour parachuted in somebody unknown, and she is now complaining that she wasn't treated very nicely or something. I don't know what. What I want to ask you is, I noticed that Jeremy Corbyn is planning to set up monthly forums in his constituency, which I think is an excellent idea. And I will be approaching our MP once he's got his feet under the table to see if he would consider doing that. And I would see that as part of the community organising that Jeremy Corbyn started and then was so rudely interrupted by other forces within the Labour Party. The thing is, what support do you think we will get from the trade union movement if we start to try rebuilding our politics from the grassroots in that way?
Well, I've been involved in setting up something called the For Many Network. So I've been working with the likes of Ken Loach and Andrew Feinstein and Naomi Idris to put something together that we organised around principles. But part of that was actually to set up what we call people's parliaments, because what we recognise is that we get told what our priorities are. When I ask what they are, we're told what they are. So we wanted to set up these people's parliaments. So basically they would have run via a street stall, and you would have chose one of the principles, an issue that you believe would change your life if it was made would make a difference to your life locally, and one nationally, and then we'd have brought everybody from that community together and would have debated it in a forum. During the election, I got the opportunity to work with Assemble, who also I've gone down this path now of holding these community groupings. And I was very impressed with what they did. I was very impressed with how they went about. And I do think the discussions that we had at some of those events were really, really important. But where the trade union movement comes in, I don't see currently the opportunity for the leaderships of trade unions to want to get involved. And the reason why I say that is because they don't necessarily believe that the way to improve society is by organising the community. They believe the way to improve society is by organising the workplace. But my belief is that I've never met a worker that doesn't come and live in a community. And to me, if you want to get people to understand the benefits of trade unionism, you have to be at the heart of the community. And I think that's the key. I think the key to how the trade union movement not just survives, but builds a future for itself, is when it actually recognises that the key is being at the heart of every community like we used to be. Because that's how we started. And that's where we need to get back to. So I hope that sort of answers your question. I'm sorry if you want me to say, yeah, I think the trade union, but I don't, not until it's demonstrated. When we did the mixed strike campaign, at the very beginning, when we were doing the fast food rights stuff, I was called an extremist for making demands like £10 an hour and ending youth rights and abolishing 0-hour contracts. And that was from the trade union side. Fast forward to 2017, and it's the centrepiece of the Labour Party going to a general election. And all of a sudden, all those people that said I was an extremist are now claiming responsibility that they came up with the campaigns. But I'm not bothered who wants to claim glory for anything. I mean, the most important thing was we raised wages for workers. We gave them the opportunity to find out they had power by taking them on strike. We changed their options by making McDonald's offer them contracts of employment, even though they made them a crappy offer. But the fact was, it forced this massive global corporation to do it. We're still putting massive pressure on McDonald's through the sexual harassment stuff and starting a campaign around how we end sexual harassment, not just for McDonald's workers, but all workers. So for me, all of that, once it's done, all right, makes people say, oh yeah, I think that might be a model we want to get into, and we was responsible for it, and I'd be quite happy for them to take it. They can have it.
Yeah, it's the same message, isn't it? In solidarity lies power, whether it's solidarity in your local community or in your union, I suppose.
Yeah.
And that's the message we've got to get over to people. They have power if they choose to get together and use it.
And the strike campaign was all about that. I mean, when we went on strike, we used to bring the priest, we used to bring the rabbi, we would bring the imam, we would bring the trades counsellor, we would bring people, the educationalists, and get them to go in to the McDonald's restaurant and say, these people are going on strike, and if they get victimized, we will tell people, at our church or our mosque or, our synagogue, whatever, wherever they were originating from, that they will tell their people to boycott your business. Because we recognize the heart of the community was the power that protected our members and protected those workers and for them to go on strike. And that was key. That was key.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks very much, Ian and Jennifer. What a good question. Very, very hopeful answer from Ian there. Mike wants to come back in. Mike?
Just very briefly, thanks, Ian and Jennifer. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to make the point that it's interesting that Jennifer's independent MP is, of course, a Gaza independent. And that is where really a lot of the dynamism about people taking action directly and en masse is happening. And so I think, you know, when we talk about rebuilding our communities and, you know, building, I suppose, you know, here am I am almost looking backwards in history to a time in the 19th century when workers' self-help was really important, and working class communities, okay, they were bound together by a degree of social conservatism and religion, but nonetheless, working class communities helped each other and educated each other, and workers' education was really important. But then, as now, the focus was at least as much outward as it was inward. In other words, we don't just look at ourselves and what happens to our own working class. We look at what happens to the working class internationally and how we relate to the events that happen in the world, because that's what defines us.
I totally agree. I mean, and again, you know, going back to the McStrike campaign, obviously, you know, our biggest funders were the Americans. I mean, obviously, we was very involved in the fight for 15 over in the United States. But that international campaign included New Zealand, Australia, Japan. You know, it included Belgium, it included France, it included Germany. It was a total campaign that recognised the exploitation of McDonald's workers. But most of those campaigns also led to community campaigns. I mean, obviously, so the Black Lives Matter campaign came out of the Fight for 15 campaign, which is about organising, you know, the McDonald's workers in America. I mean, you know, I was over with the Americans watching how they organised, and you know, all of those people that were involved in the Black Lives Matter, and bringing those learnings back and using them over here, and then sharing that information, because that's the important bit. I mean, it's all right seeing it, it's all right taking part in it, but then the most important thing is sharing those experiences. So yeah, I wouldn't disagree. International solidarity is the key, you know, and recognizing the importance of it, and recognizing that, you know, it is about class, whether it's in the United Kingdom, you know, throughout Europe, throughout the Americas, wherever it is in the world. It's about how we come together and recognize that whilst, you know, globalization has happened and, you know, global capital operates globally, we sometimes believe we should operate individually, and we can't be a global corporation from one street. Ain't gonna happen.
Thanks very much, Ian. Can I just ask you? You've answered everybody else's questions beautifully. Can I ask you just to come back to Steve's question, because I've got two more people who want to speak, ask a question. If I could ask you to come back to Steve's contribution, and then I'll go to the other two people.
I feel that the left needs to take up the question of our constitution and our democracy fundamentally in a Republican direction. That's my simple question, that we don't limit ourselves, as it were, to simply working within the framework of the existing constitutional parliamentary structure that we've got. I think that's what I'm trying to answer.
I mean, to answer it, I mean, obviously this is a personal position.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I've always believed that power should be as close to the people as possible. You know, so I'm all for taking democracy down to the closest level so we can get people operating on it. I believe that the political system in this country is broken. I don't think it represents democracy at all, because I mean, and that's just, you know, we can see that in this recent election. You know, less people voted in 2019, but we've got a Labour government. with an absolute huge stonking majority. You know, so democracy doesn't work and votes don't matter. Um, I I mean, I would be interested in looking at that document and seeing, you know, maybe taking it to REC and seeing what they do. I mean, because, you know, we are quite open, you know, we're open to, you know, we've been taking part in changing the way the voting system works. I mean, some people would agree with that, some people won't agree with that, but if you're going to change the system, then you've got to look at how can we change it. And one of the things that's on offer that has a vehicle at this moment in time to change, to make people's votes matter, is a campaign around make votes matter, you know. And if you, I saw up in Scotland how the campaign for Scottish independence changed people's positions on politics. You know, that was the most important thing, the outcome from that debate for me. You know, personally, if I'd have been in Scotland, I would have voted for independence, but I wasn't in Scotland. I was living here in England. But I saw in the pubs and the clubs, you know, all of the young people taking part in political discussions and political debate, and it opened for, certainly for the next two elections, you know, this belief about politics being important to them. And so I think for me, we have to have this debate about how does politics change? Otherwise, they will continue to maintain their control and power and influence over us. And we need change.
Absolutely, Ian. Does that answer your question, Steve?
It does in a way, but I think the reference to Scotland is very, very important there, Ian. That what they were doing in Scotland wasn't just changing how votes were, it was they were trying to change the whole constitution of Scotland and create a new system of government in Scotland. And had they won the yes vote, that's what would have happened next. It didn't happen. We sank backwards, and that break in our old system. And in a way, what I'd like to say is that that's the way of thinking about England. So I completely agree with you at what you've said there. And we have to have that way of thinking for England too, is what I'd say. Yes, yes, Carol, it does answer my question. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Steve. I've got actually 4 hands up now. So could I ask people to keep their questions or contributions down to about 3 minutes from now on, please? So Ian.
It would have been particularly easy for me to do that if we hadn't just talked about Scotland before I came on. I'll still try. As someone who was living up there, I still am. It was at that time I actually voted and campaigned for no, but part of my critique of the SNP independence prospectus was it was a bit too conservative, keep the Queen, stay in NATO, which had always been against until they had the real shot at the referendum and so on. So that was one of my worries about it. I'm also glad that I don't need to pass through a border guard that England might have put up, whether we wanted to or not, to see Ian and Steve. But anyway, my question was actually about another of my countrymen, funnily enough. I put it in the chat when you mentioned that you'd been involved a bit with Assemble, which I don't know a huge amount about. That I knew that they were campaigning for Claudia Webb when I went to Leicester to campaign for her. And also for Shawkat in the next seat. But what do you think of David Miller's comments from another platform that I think you were on too, Ian, where he said that they were linked to Just Stop Oil and that JSO were linked to the intelligence services? I don't know if he meant in terms of being heavily infiltrated, as a lot of left groups could be, or that their actual stated aims were the aims of the state because of net zero. He referred me to Behind Labour have done some work on this, which I'm not actually at the time yet to check out. So perhaps I'd be more convinced if I did. But I think it's a principle that you can be wrong politically without being a state op, actually, as a Marxist. I believe a lot of people can be, whether it's soft left or anarchists. I don't think it was Assemble. I think it was Collective that had the old Landsmanite structure of being a private company, which is a bit more of a red flag to me. But I am worried about the assemblies as I've seen on some of my post-election WhatsApps, Corbyn's pushing having local assemblies everywhere, almost in counterposition to setting up a party. Says he doesn't want it to be about individuals, which is admirable on a personal level. But if he's the only individual that everyone could unite around, from the most woke to George Galloway and everyone in between, then maybe he should, in this instance, take that individual role. So I think assemblies is a good idea, but I'd be worried about putting it against setting up a party if that's if people have got past the question about reclaiming Labour. I think there has to be something rather than just independence and individual assemblies by next time. So I just wonder what you think of all of that, and David's thing as well.
I mean, when I went on there, we were talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict. I mean, obviously, wasn't talking about just stop oil or anything like that. My understanding is that if they're part of the state, I mean, 5 of their members have just, been put in prison. I mean, obviously, they haven't got a very good deal if that's the case.
Indeed.
So, I mean, but I'm not here or able to, challenge what Dave Miller said, because I mean, it's so often proved to be right, but one of the problems is you can be right about some people, but not all of the people. I mean, what I found about the Assemble War is they were inclusive. They were ordinary people that were involved. A lot of people that hadn't been involved in politics previously, but felt very passionate, particularly around what was happening in Gaza. We sat round in circles and talked about the issues that impacted them in their community, which I thought was great, because there's not often a platform to do that. So the downside to it was there wasn't a lot of structure to it, because there was this belief that the structure will just come out of it, which obviously as a trade unionist is always very difficult, because I'm used to a structured. So that was a little bit chaotic. But for me, I think they're great. I'm going to go to one on Saturday in Wigan, because I enjoyed the one that I did with Jan in Wigan during the election. And I think the more of these things that happen, the better. On the question about Jeremy Corbyn leading a new party, I adore Jeremy Corbyn. I think he's fantastic. I think his politics throughout the years have been absolutely fantastic. But a bit like Joe Biden, he's knocking on a bit, I mean, no disrespect to Jeremy, but if we're going to build a movement, then I'm not necessarily sure that it should be the likes of Jeremy Corbyn. I think he should definitely be part of any movement, because he brings a lot to the table. But I was very impressed, and I am very impressed with the likes of Leanne Mohammed. I'm very impressed with Andrew Feinstein. I'm impressed. There is an awful lot of people that recognize that it's not about having, and we're always bad at this on the left, by the way, in my opinion. We put people up, and we make them it, and we go about getting them and all about them. And then when it fails, we find reasons to say why they failed. And then we divide ourselves based on why we believe they failed, and we fall out over it. Whereas, again, I'm going to go back to the reasons why we set up the fast food rights campaign, is because I believed you could unite the left around a set of principles and aims and objectives, which led me to actually witness working with the Workers' Revolutionary Party, the Socialist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, the Socialist Labour Party, the Liberal Party, the Green Party, who all convalesced, right? Invited me to their meetings to talk about our aspirations for our members. So it demonstrated that actually, if you've got some common beliefs, we can unite together and build a massive movement. And to me, that's the important thing. It's what are our objectives? Do we want decent homes for people? If we want decent homes for people, how are we going to get them? Should that be a priority? If we want the NHS back in, public ownership, should that be our priority? If it's workers' rights, should that be our priority? And if we agree on those things, then it doesn't matter what our history is or what our past was. We agree on the same thing, so let's argue for them. And that's what I believe in. And that's for the collective, by the way. I think one of the problems with the collective is you haven't been able to find out exactly who the structure is. And part of that was because there was a court thing that was hanging over some of them. But I would imagine going forward, you'll probably get to find out more people involved. And some might be surprised and some may not about who's actually, at the top of the collective organisation. But it's not for me to say, because it's up to them to come out and tell you themselves.
Thanks very much, Ian. I've got John Fitzgerald and then Malcolm Millay.
Good evening. Thanks, Ian. It's very, you covered a lot of points, and and everybody else has made some very important contributions. I thought what Mike was speaking about, Mike Hope, was, I think, the issue around how global issues affect us, and certainly can split the left in various ways. And when you were talking about Ukraine and so on, being a proxy war in China and so on, I think, it's about people on the front line, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in Russia. And for us, it's about the international links with the trade unions in those countries and how we build those links. I mean, my understanding is the trade unions in Ukraine are asking for that support. And the support that are actually being given, made, so on. Of course, there's, the whole place is just full of missiles and bombs and God knows whatever. But as Mike says, Putin is not a man to be trusted. I agree with you. I certainly don't want to see an extension of NATO. But the actual on the line now, what is happening, not as bad as it has been actually, because there has been the strategies have changed, but nevertheless, it's the people on the front line who are dying, whichever way you want to look at it. And it's those trade unions in those countries that have asked us to help them. So I still believe that it's important that we do give them a chance. That's all it's about, having a chance. The idea of negotiations will only come when either side, but particularly the Ukrainians, when the Ukrainians feel that the negotiations are in their interest, because that's in the interest of their country. And I don't think we can put China up as saying, well, it's a proxy war in order to take on China. That's in the future. We don't know what's going to happen. I mean, if Trump gets in, the whole thing may change. So all I'm pointing out is that we have to remember who's on the front line here, and that the trade unions in Ukraine are, want our support. That's my view, and I think, as I say, with China, I agree. It's a worrying prospect, but nevertheless, it's what it is now that matters for me.
Thank you, John. Yeah, very good points. I'm going to bring in Malcolm Millay. If I can bring in number 2, Ian, and then you can answer questions. Is that okay? So, Malcolm?
Yeah, hi. My questions are really quite off the wall. I mean, one of them I saw on the chat, but it never continued, was this strange comment for me from David Miller that somehow Just Stop Oil and Youth Demand, etc., all sort of infiltrated or front or deep state or something very. I mean, I've been looking into them as much as I can. And after he's made that comment, I've got no special facility to look at anything rather than anybody else on the internet, but I couldn't find anything at all about any suspicious connections with either of them. I don't have his email. I asked Tony Greenstein, he said about it. So I don't know anybody here knows anything about it. That was my first point. And the other point is, I'm surprised that in all these people talking about who should do this and who should do that, why nobody's ever mentioned Fazia Shaheen. Fazia Shaheen, I suppose you all know. I don't really know. I mean, she used to appear on television programs, and I was always struck by her incredible intelligence, which, having looked at her Wikipedia page, wasn't very surprising. I mean, she is extremely intelligent, and she was supposed to be the MP for Chingford, the Labour Party, and somehow she was sort of got rid of at the last minute because I think she supported Gaza and was some sort of shenanigans, and so she stood as an independent and got quite a lot of votes, but of course didn't win, as she should have done. And so those are my 2 points. I mean, I don't know if anybody here has got any comments about any of them. I don't think they're really questions for Ian Hodson, so I do apologise for maybe you having to answer a question something you don't know anything about at all, but you just say I don't know anything about it.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. I think we'd all like to know what happened. We'd all have liked to have seen Faiza get into that constituency, and it was a great shame that she didn't manage it. I'm going to bring in Craig now and then go back to Ian.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Ian, and everybody else. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I'll just make a quick point. I like the comrade who spoke earlier. I also am in Scotland at the moment. I'm actually the assistant branch secretary of Unite's retired members branch in Glasgow. I just wanted to make a couple of points, really, and I think I don't want to fight with Ian, was it, who was the comrade who was talking from Scotland about voting no. I was actually on the opposite side during the independence referendum, but we won't fight over it. I was in RIC. The reason I was in RIC at the time, the Radical Independence Campaign, relates directly to what we've been talking about, I think. It wasn't about supporting the SNP or its perspective. It was always about breaking up the constitutional obscenity, I would argue, of the British state. And therefore, I think what Steve said about, a different type of politics and the left taking up political demands for a different kind of constitutional arrangement, a different kind of political and democratic structure is very, very important. And central to that, actually, is raising within the trade union movement, and particularly amongst the grassroots of our unions and our branches, the importance of that political dimension. Obviously, the economic struggle is vital day to day in both our communities and in our workplaces, but the political issue is also very, very important, and you can see it directly in the new anti-trade union laws that have been passed in the last few months, in the dying days of the Sunak regime, the minimum employment level legislation, and so on. All of that relies very heavily on, as do other aspects of the anti-trade union laws, actually, rely very, very heavily on the use of secondary legislation which can avoid parliamentary scrutiny. And that is directly linked into the degenerated nature of the British democracy that we have, the degenerated constitutional form of democracy. So I think, that there is a direct relevance there to what we as trade unionists are trying to fight, and that is, and it's very, very important, of course, that we understand how these are linked also to other aspects of legislation which not directly aimed at trade unions. Well, they are aimed at trade unions, and that's the strengthening of the anti-protest laws and so on. And you know, in the context of what happened just recently with the Stop the Oil activists being having these draconian sentences imposed on them, those laws were introduced at a late stage, possibly unlawfully by Braverman, and she's been, you know, there's a challenge going on in the courts at the moment by, I think it's by Liberty, to stop the government pursuing the challenge to the High Court ruling, which said that it was unlawful to have to make those changes without parliamentary scrutiny. But the constitutional setup is such that there's no basic law to guarantee workers' rights in those kind of contexts. So I think it's a very, very important thing that we do make the case for the left within the unions to take up political questions. It's directly relevant to the nature of anti-trade union laws, and it's directly relevant to rebuilding from the grassroots upwards the strength and confidence of our branches and our members in collective action. Sorry, I haven't got a question, but that was
Absolutely, Craig. Thanks very much. So I'm going to go back to you now, Ian, to answer those or comment on those comments.
I mean, you know, just going back to the Ukraine, I understand people take different positions, but you know, I think you know the position of it's the people on the front line that are key to this. It's the people that are dying that are the key to this, and that's why, you know, like I say, Russians out. You know, I mean, I don't have a lot of time for Zelensky. I mean, he's shut down trade unions. I don't think he's very worker friendly. I don't think he's very democratic either. And I think he's part of the problem. But, you know, the people are the ones that are dying. And I just think, you know, every war ends in negotiations. Every war ends with negotiated peace settlements. I just think that in 2024, after centuries of wars, you would think that these politicians would realize that sacrificing other people is not the appropriate way to reach statesmanship. I think there is too much emphasis on ego of the politician that wants to stride the world stage as some macho man. And I think that's the problem, that politicians want to boost their egos via the blood of others, rather than say, or be perceived as being soft because they turned their face away from war and tried to negotiate peace and said, I'm going to use money to end starvation, improve people's health, make sure children are educated so they don't fall out. Because war to me is the failure of politics. War is the inability of politicians to actually be doing their job or to be good at their job. Politicians have failed. That's why we have wars, because they think they're bigger than the other guy and they can do what they want, and they want to show him because they haven't got the ability to debate with him to win the argument. As for Faiza, I mean, there's so many, I think, that stood at the last election, you know, that we have an opportunity to come together around. I've been so absolutely in awe of the Palestinian marches and those marches and the way that they've been organized, which demonstrates there's a real need to recognize there's more that brings us together than keeps us apart. And there's lots and lots of people. So if we're talking about changing politics, and I'm going to use the Greens, and I know the Greens aren't always seen as the most important of the socialist, and some people wouldn't regard them as socialist. But I would say their leadership model, whereas they don't have a leader, they have a couple of them. You know, Why not? Why not have more than one? Why do we have to have one leader? You know, our history shows when we have one person that's at the helm, you know, we get picked off. Let's have a few of them. Let's have a few of them, but let's build together. Let's build around the things that change people's lives. Let's put our argument to the wider the community instead of to ourselves. Let's get the left's argument for what society can be away from you and me to out there, because we've got all the answers, I believe. But unfortunately, the people don't ever get to hear them. And that to me is what I think we need to do. Why I have no confidence that Starmer's going to deliver. Why I believe that the left will have to recognise eventually that the right can win. And if we don't do it sooner rather than later, we might find that the people of the United Kingdom are not as sensible as the people of France and actually vote to put a fascist government in power. And that is why I think we, as a class and as a movement, need to come together and really go forward and build that movement, and maybe take some hope from what we saw Nelson Mandela do with the ANC. You know, look how they built and dismantled apartheid. It can be done. Thank you very much.
Yes. I absolutely agree with you about putting leaders. I mean, all leaders have feet of clay. I mean, we're all human, and putting leaders on a pedestal and then, you know, knocking them down when they don't come through with the goods is really not the way to go. I absolutely agree with you, Ian. We need people to work together. Absolutely agree with you. Anyway, I don't see any more hands up. And so I am just going to say thank you very much indeed, Ian, for coming tonight and talking to us. And your lead-off speech was very, very good indeed. And all your answers have been absolutely excellent. And the questions, of course, have been very good. And the contributions have been very good. So thank you so much, Ian, for giving up your time and speaking to our group this evening. And thank you to everybody else who's contributed and asked questions. And enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm sure he's all soon.